A woman with a mysterious past and keen observational skills travels west as a mail-order bride seeking a fresh start, only to arrive and discover her intended groom has been murdered. As she struggles to find her place in a suspicious town that views her as both a victim and a stranger, the local sheriff begins to notice her uncanny ability to spot clues others miss. This is a story about finding purpose in unexpected tragedy, and how intelligence overlooked can become the key to solving a mystery that threatens an entire community. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Montana Territory had never looked more forbidding than on the day Eleanor Palmer stepped off the train at Whispering Pines Station. At 32, she stood on the weathered platform, her leather valise clutched tightly in gloved hands as the September wind whipped strands of auburn hair from beneath her practical bonnet. The journey from Boston had been long and punishing. 3 days on crowded trains, breathing coal smoke and sleeping upright on hard benches, followed by a bone-rattling stagecoach ride that had left her with bruises she was too ladylike to mention, but the discomfort had been worth it. After years of working as a shop girl, then as a nurse during the war, and finally as a companion to a demanding elderly widow, Eleanor was ready for something entirely her own. The advertisement that had changed everything was folded neatly in her reticule, its creases worn from repeated readings. Seeking a bride of mature years and steady disposition for prosperous cattle ranch, must be practical, hard-working, and amenable to life in growing frontier town. Age 28-35 preferred. Position as respected wife and partner guaranteed. Reply with references to Thomas Blackwood, Whispering Pines, Montana Territory. Eleanor had answered immediately, her letter carefully composed to emphasize her practical nature, her experience managing households, and her desire for a stable partnership rather than romantic notions. She had purposely not mentioned her other skills. Her years assisting a Boston police inspector with filing and organization that had evolved into an unofficial apprenticeship in detection, her uncanny memory for details, or her ability to read people and situations with uncomfortable accuracy. Those talents had brought her more trouble than benefit in Boston society. Thomas Blackwood's response had been prompt and favorable. His letters over the following months revealed an intelligent, straightforward man who valued honesty and hard work. He described his ranch, the town he'd helped establish, and his position as one of the founding members of the community. By their third exchange, he had sent train fare and a gold band that Eleanor now wore, though it felt strange on her finger. "Miss Palmer?" Eleanor turned to find a tall man with a weathered face and a star pinned to his vest approaching. Not Thomas. And then she masked her disappointment with a polite smile. "Yes, I'm Eleanor Palmer." The man removed his hat, revealing silver-streaked dark hair. His expression was grave in a way that sent a chill through Eleanor before he even spoke. "Sheriff Nathaniel Hayes, ma'am. I'm afraid I have some difficult news." He glanced around the busy platform. "Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private." Eleanor's stomach tightened with dread, but years of nursing had taught her to maintain composure in the face of bad news. "Of course, Sheriff." He led her to a small office in the station, closing the door before turning to face her. "Miss Palmer, I'm very sorry to inform you that Thomas Blackwood was found dead 3 days ago at his ranch. He was murdered." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. She sank into the nearest chair, her valise slipping forgotten to the floor. "Murdered?" she whispered, the word foreign on her tongue despite having heard it often enough in her previous life in Boston. "Yes, ma'am. Shot at close range in his own home. We're investigating, but haven't made much headway yet." The sheriff watched her carefully. "I understand. This must be a terrible shock, coming all this way to marry a man you'll never meet." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the reality of her situation. She had invested nearly everything in this journey. selling a few possessions, giving up her position, spending most of her savings on appropriate clothing for her new life. And now her intended husband was dead, leaving her stranded in a frontier town where she knew no one. "What happened?" she asked finally, her analytical mind already working despite her shock. "Do you have any suspects?" Something flickered in the sheriff's eyes, surprise perhaps at her direct question, rather than tears or hysterics. Not yet. Mr. Blackwood was well respected, but had his share of business rivals. The ranch is valuable, prime grazing land with good water access. Eleanor nodded, processing this information. "And where am I to go now?" "That's why I came to meet you," Sheriff Hayes said. "Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house has a room available. She's been informed of your situation and is expecting you. The town council has agreed to cover your accommodations for 2 weeks while you decide what you wish to do. Perhaps return east." The thought of the return journey, defeated and destitute, was intolerable. Eleanor straightened her spine. "Thank you for the consideration, Sheriff, but I have no intention of returning to Boston. I'll need to find work here." His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's determined of you, Miss Palmer, though I'm not sure what positions might be available for a—" "I have multiple skills," Eleanor interrupted, rising to her feet. "I've worked as a shop assistant, a nurse during the war, and managed a substantial household. I'm educated and can keep accounts. I'm certain I can make myself useful somewhere in Whispering Pines." The sheriff studied her with newfound interest. "I see. Well, Mrs. Sullivan might know of opportunities. She seems to know everyone's business in town." As they left the station office, Eleanor paused. "Sheriff Hayes, I would like to see where Thomas lived and died. It might help me understand the man I was meant to marry." Again, that flicker of surprise. "I'm not sure that's appropriate, Miss Palmer. It's an active crime scene and—" "I've seen death before, Sheriff," Eleanor said quietly. "I nursed soldiers with missing limbs and mortal wounds. I've prepared bodies for burial. I'm not squeamish." He regarded her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Perhaps tomorrow, then. After you've had time to rest and adjust to these unfortunate circumstances." Eleanor accepted this compromise, though her mind was already working, cataloguing questions. What kind of man had Thomas Blackwood been, really? Who would want him dead? And what would become of her now, a mail-order bride with no groom in a town full of strangers? Sheriff Hayes helped her into his wagon, placing her valise behind the seat. As they pulled away from the station, Eleanor gazed at the town spreading before them. Whispering Pines was larger than she'd expected. A proper main street lined with wooden buildings, side streets with modest homes, a church steeple rising in the distance. Under different circumstances, she might have felt a surge of excitement at the prospect of making this growing community her home. Now, she merely felt the weight of uncertainty and a strange, inappropriate curiosity about the murder of the man. She had traveled so far to marry. It was a curiosity she knew she should suppress. Women who asked too many questions were rarely welcomed, something she'd learned painfully in Boston. But as the wagon rattled down the main street, she couldn't help noticing details. The new construction at one end of town, the saloon where men gathered despite the early hour, the general store with a help wanted sign barely visible in the window. Her trained eye missed nothing. It was both her gift and her burden. Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house turned out to be a tidy, 2-story structure with a wide porch and curtained windows. The widow herself met them at the door, a plump, energetic woman with kind eyes and an assessing gaze that took in Eleanor's travel-worn appearance without judgment. "So you're Thomas's intended," she said, after the sheriff made introductions. "Such a tragedy, my dear. Come in, come in. I've prepared the blue room for you, best one in the house. You must be exhausted after your journey." The sheriff tipped his hat. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Sullivan's capable hands, Miss Palmer. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon around 2, if that suits you. Eleanor thanked him, understanding they had an appointment to visit Thomas Blackwood's ranch, though he'd been carefully vague in front of the widow. As he turned to leave, she called after him, "Sheriff Hayes, one more question, if I may." He turned back, eyebrows raised in inquiry. "The gold ring Mr. Blackwood sent me," Eleanor said, touching the simple band on her finger. "Was he wearing its match when he was found?" The sheriff's expression shifted subtly. There was that look again, the one she recognized from Boston when she'd asked questions that surprised the police inspector. A look that said she'd noticed something others might. "No, Miss Palmer," he said slowly. "He wasn't. In fact, there was a pale band on his finger suggesting he'd removed it recently, or someone had taken it." Eleanor nodded, filing this information away. "Thank you, Sheriff. Until tomorrow." As she followed Mrs. Sullivan into the boarding house, Eleanor felt the weight of the sheriff's gaze on her back. She had revealed too much of herself too quickly, her observant nature, her analytical thinking. In Boston, those traits had eventually made her unwelcome in polite society, marked her as odd, unsuitable. She would need to be more careful here, in Whispering Pines. But as Mrs. Sullivan showed her to a clean, comfortable room overlooking the main street, Eleanor couldn't suppress the questions forming in her mind, the possible scenarios unfolding like maps. Thomas Blackwood, the man who was to be her husband, had been murdered. His killer walked free, and despite all practical considerations and proper behavior, despite knowing it could earn her the same suspicious glances she'd endured in Boston, Eleanor Palmer found herself consumed with the need to understand why. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sleep eluded Eleanor that first night in Whispering Pines. The comfortable bed in Mrs. Sullivan's blue room offered little comfort to a mind racing with questions. By dawn, she had made a decision. Whatever her uncertain future held, she would first understand the past, specifically the circumstances of Thomas Blackwood's death. She dressed in her second-best dress, navy blue with modest white trim, and arranged her hair in a simple but neat style. First impressions would matter greatly in a town already curious about the mail-order bride, whose groom had been murdered before she arrived. Over breakfast, Mrs. Sullivan proved to be a fountain of information, though Eleanor suspected much of. It was speculation wrapped in certainty. Thomas Blackwood was one of our founding citizens, the widow explained, pouring coffee. Came here 8 years ago when this was barely a settlement. Built that ranch from nothing, helped establish the town council, even donated land for the church. "He sounds well respected," Eleanor observed, buttering a biscuit. "Oh, he was, which makes it all the more shocking." Mrs. Sullivan lowered her voice, though they were alone in the dining room. "Found shot right in his own study. His foreman, Jake Winters, discovered him when Thomas didn't come out for morning rounds." Eleanor noted the use of Thomas's first name. "Were you well acquainted with Mr. Blackwood?" A slight flush colored the widow's cheeks. "Everyone knew Thomas. He was a regular at my Sunday dinners, a proper gentleman always. That's why I was surprised when he advertised for a bride. Most thought he might court locally." "I see." Eleanor filed this information away. Perhaps there had been local expectations or disappointments regarding Thomas's marital intentions. And were there any particular local ladies who might have had expectations? Mrs. Sullivan's eyes widened slightly at Eleanor's directness. "Well, Judith Morgan, she owns the dress shop. She'd set her cap for him ages ago. And Mayor Morgan's sister. That's Judith's Aunt Victoria. She has a daughter of marriageable age. They weren't pleased when word spread about you coming. The Morgan family." Eleanor mentally noted the names. "Are there others who might have had reason to dislike Mr. Blackwood? Business rivals, perhaps?" The widow studied Eleanor with new interest. "You ask unusual questions for a woman in mourning, Miss Palmer." Eleanor sipped her coffee, maintaining a composed expression. I'm mourning possibilities, Mrs. Sullivan, not realities. I never met Thomas Blackwood in the flesh, but I did commit to joining my life with his, and now I find myself stranded in an unfamiliar town. Understanding the circumstances seems prudent. This practical explanation seemed to satisfy the widow. Well, there's always friction between cattlemen and sheepmen. The Harrington brothers run sheep on the next property over. There've been disputes about grazing rights and water access. By the time Sheriff Hayes arrived that afternoon, Eleanor had gathered considerable town gossip from Mrs. Sullivan and a brief walk down Main Street. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, had been particularly informative when she inquired about the "Help Wanted" sign in his window. "You're Blackwood's intended?" he'd asked, eyeing her with undisguised curiosity. "Terrible business, that. You planning to stay in Whispering Pines, then?" "I'm considering my options," Eleanor had replied. "I need employment in the meantime." Peterson had scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Could use help with the books and inventory. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and my daughter, who usually helps, is expecting her third child. You have experience with figures?" Eleanor had smiled. "Extensive experience, Mr. Peterson. I managed accounts for a substantial household in Boston." By the time she left the store, she had secured a position beginning the following Monday, 3 days hence, and gleaned that Thomas Blackwood had ordered supplies for significant household improvements just a week before his death. "Seemed like a man preparing for a bride, all right," Peterson had said. "New curtain material, better dishes, even ordered a proper writing desk. Said it was for his wife's correspondence." Now, as she climbed into Sheriff Hayes's wagon for the trip to Blackwood's ranch, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of emotions. Grief for a future that would never be, curiosity about the man who had died, and beneath it all, the familiar, analytical focus that had both served and isolated her in Boston. "You seem to be settling in quickly," the sheriff observed as they left town. "Mrs. Sullivan mentioned you've already secured employment with Peterson." "News travels efficiently here," Eleanor noted. Hayes chuckled. "Small towns run on gossip. Miss Palmer, you do well to remember that." The implication wasn't lost on her. Her questions were being noted and discussed. She would need to be more discreet. The landscape opened up as they left town, rolling grasslands dotted with pine stands that gave the settlement its name. In the distance, mountains rose blue and imposing against the sky. "It's beautiful country," Eleanor said softly. Blackwood thought so. He had his pick of land when he arrived, chose this valley for its water and shelter. The sheriff glanced at her. "What did he tell you about his ranch in his letters?" "That it was prosperous, with good water and grazing. That he'd built a comfortable home suitable for a wife. That he employed 5 men year-round and more during calving and roundup." Eleanor recited the facts from memory. "He mentioned expanding his operation this year with new breeding stock." Hayes nodded. "All true. He ran one of the most successful spreads in the territory." As they crested a small rise, the ranch came into view. A substantial log house with additional wings, a large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and smoke rose from the main house chimney. "Someone's still there?" Eleanor asked. "Jake Winters, the foreman. He's keeping things running until—" But the sheriff trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the topic of inheritance. As they approached, a tall man with sun-weathered skin emerged from the barn. He watched their arrival with obvious wariness. "That's Winters," Hayes said quietly. "Been with Blackwood from the beginning, took the murder hard." The wagon pulled up to the hitching post near the house. Hayes helped Eleanor down, then addressed the foreman. "Jake, this is Miss Eleanor Palmer. She was Mr. Blackwood's intended." Winters removed his hat, revealing sandy hair streaked with gray. His blue eyes studied Eleanor with an intensity that reminded her of the Boston police inspector she'd once assisted. "Ma'am," he said finally, "sorry about the circumstances." "Thank you, Mr. Winters." Eleanor met his gaze directly. "I understand. You found him." Something flickered in the foreman's expression, surprise at her directness, perhaps. "Yes, ma'am. When he didn't come out for morning rounds, I checked the house, found him in his study." "I'd like to see it," Eleanor said, turning to the sheriff. "If that's permitted." Hayes hesitated, then nodded. "The body's been removed, and we've completed our examination. I suppose there's no harm." The main house was larger than it appeared from a distance, built of substantial logs with a stone foundation. The interior was surprisingly refined. Polished wood floors, quality furniture, even some artwork on the walls. A home built by a man of means and taste. "He added the east wing last year," Winters explained as they moved through the house. "Said he wanted things proper for when he married." The study was located at the back of the house, a handsome room, lined with bookshelves, and featuring a large desk positioned to take advantage of the light from 2 windows. A Persian rug covered most of the floor, its rich colors muted by a large dark stain near the desk. Eleanor noted that the room had been restored to order. Whatever investigation the sheriff had conducted was complete. She moved slowly around, the perimeter taking in details. The books were well used, not mere decoration. History, cattle breeding, some classics of literature. A man of education, then. "He was found here," she asked, indicating the stained area. The sheriff nodded. "Seated. At his desk. Shot once at close range." Eleanor studied the desk, a solid piece of craftsmanship with several drawers and a leather writing surface. Account books were stacked neatly at one corner. A letterbox sat at another. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the box. Hayes exchanged a glance with Winters, then nodded. "We've gone through his papers. Nothing seemed relevant to the murder." Eleanor opened the box, finding it organized with methodical precision. Business correspondence was separated from personal letters. She noted the bundle of her own letters, tied with string, placed in the personal section. The sight of her handwriting among Thomas Blackwood's possessions created an unexpected tightness in her chest. "Did you find anything unusual when you examined the room?" she asked the sheriff, careful to keep her tone conversational rather than interrogative. "Nothing obvious," Hayes replied. "No sign of a struggle, no forced entry to the house. Whoever shot him, Blackwood either knew them or wasn't alarmed by their presence." Eleanor continued her circuit of the room, pausing at a small table near the window. A chess set was laid out, a game in progress. "Did Mr. Blackwood play chess regularly?" she asked Winters. The foreman nodded. "Most evenings, usually with Doc Harris when he visited, sometimes with Mayor Morgan." "And this particular game? Do you know who his opponent was?" Winters frowned. "Can't say. He had several regular visitors that last week." Eleanor studied the board, noting the position of the pieces. An advanced game with Black, presumably Blackwood's opponent, having a slight advantage. She filed this. Observation away, unsure of its significance, but unwilling to overlook any detail. As they left the study, Eleanor paused in the hallway, noticing a framed photograph on the wall. Thomas Blackwood stood among a group of men, all wearing expressions of frontier seriousness. She recognized a younger Sheriff Hayes and identified Mayor Morgan from Mrs. Sullivan's description. Another man stood close to Blackwood, their posture, suggesting friendship. "That's the town council, original founding members," Hayes explained, following her gaze. "Taken 5 years ago." "And this man next to Mr. Blackwood? Doc Harris. They came west together, old friends from back east." Eleanor committed the faces to memory. "I'd like to meet Dr. Harris, if possible. As a friend of Thomas, he might help." "Me understand the man I was to marry." The sheriff studied her with that now familiar look of reassessment. "I'm sure that could be arranged. Doc's office is just off Main Street." As they prepared to leave the ranch, Jake Winters approached Eleanor. His earlier wariness had softened somewhat. "He was looking forward to your arrival, ma'am." the foreman said quietly. Had me and the boys fixing up the place for weeks. Wanted everything just so. The simple statement affected Eleanor more deeply than she expected. Thank you for telling me, Mr. Winters. On the drive back to town, Eleanor was quieter, processing what she'd seen and heard. Sheriff Hayes respected her silence until they were nearly at Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house. You notice things, Miss Palmer, he said finally. Details most wouldn't. It wasn't a question, but Eleanor felt compelled to respond. A habit developed during my nursing years, I suppose. Observation can mean the difference between proper treatment and a fatal mistake. Hayes nodded slowly. Indeed. Though I suspect your observational skills extend beyond medical matters. Eleanor chose her words carefully. I've found that paying. Attention serves one well in most situations, Sheriff. As he helped her down from the wagon, Hayes hesitated. Miss Palmer, I should tell you, there's talk in town already. Speculation about your arrival coinciding with Blackwood's murder. You mean some suspect I might have orchestrated his death from a distance? Eleanor asked, keeping her voice neutral, though the suggestion was preposterous. Small towns breed wild theories, Hayes said apologetically. Best be prepared. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I'm no stranger to suspicion, Sheriff, but I assure you I came to Whispering Pines seeking a new beginning, not to end a life I never knew. As she watched him drive away, Eleanor felt the weight of the town's scrutiny settling on her shoulders. She had come west to escape being marked as different, unusual. Yet here she was, barely arrived, already drawing attention with her questions and observations. But beneath that concern lay something else, a familiar sense of purpose awakening. Thomas Blackwood had been murdered, and his killer walked free. The same analytical mind that had once helped a Boston police inspector solve puzzling crimes was already assembling the fragments of this mystery. Eleanor Palmer had come to Whispering Pines to be a wife. Fate had other plans, and though she couldn't yet admit it even to herself, the prospect of unraveling this mystery called to her in ways that the promise of marriage never had. Eleanor's first Sunday in Whispering Pines brought an opportunity to observe the town's social dynamics. Mrs. Sullivan had made it clear that church attendance was all but mandatory for respectable residents, so Eleanor donned her best dress, a deep burgundy wool with modest black trim, and accompanied her landlady to the white clapboard building at the edge of town. She felt the stares as she entered, the whispers barely contained behind gloved hands. The mail-order bride whose groom was murdered, the Eastern woman asking unusual questions, a curiosity, a spectacle, perhaps even a suspect. Hold your head high, Mrs. Sullivan murmured. Most mean no harm. They're just not used to newcomers. With your particular circumstances. Eleanor nodded, maintaining her composure as she followed the widow to a pew midway down the aisle. She recognized faces from her brief explorations of town. Mr. Peterson, from the general store, offered a polite nod, while a cluster of well-dressed women she assumed included Judith Morgan and Victoria Morgan studied her with undisguised interest. The congregation settled. A distinguished gentleman with silver hair entered with a younger woman at his side. From the photograph at Blackwood's ranch, Eleanor recognized him immediately as Dr. Harris. The service passed in a blur of hymns and sermon, Eleanor too aware of the covert glances to focus fully on the minister's words. When the congregation filed out afterward, she found herself strategically positioned near the church steps, Mrs. Sullivan at her side, making introductions. Dr. Harris, the widow called, waving the physician over. I'd like you to meet Miss Eleanor Palmer, Thomas Blackwood's intended. The doctor approached, his keen grey eyes appraising Eleanor with professional interest. The young woman beside him, perhaps 20, with chestnut hair and her father's intelligent gaze, watched with equal curiosity. Miss Palmer, Dr. Harris said, bowing slightly, I've been hoping to make your acquaintance. Please accept my condolences on Thomas's death. He was a dear friend." "Thank you, Doctor. I understand you and Mr. Blackwood had a long acquaintance." "Indeed. We came west together after the war. Different skills, but similar dreams." He gestured to the young woman. "My daughter, Rebecca." The young woman offered a genuine smile, surprising Eleanor. "Father says you're from Boston. I've always wanted to visit the East." Before Eleanor could respond, a sharp voice cut through their conversation. Well, the mysterious fiancée finally graces us with her presence." Eleanor turned to find a handsome woman in her 40s approaching, elegantly dressed in a teal gown that spoke of considerable expense. Behind her trailed a younger woman, who bore a striking resemblance. "Judith," Dr. Harris acknowledged, his tone cooling noticeably. "Miss Palmer has only just arrived under difficult circumstances. Perhaps introductions might wait for a more appropriate time." Judith Morgan, for Eleanor was certain this must be the dress shop owner Mrs. Sullivan had mentioned, ignored the doctor's gentle rebuke. "I'm merely being neighborly, Doctor." Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she addressed Eleanor. "Judith Morgan, Miss Palmer. I own the dress shop on Main Street. This is my daughter Clara. We were quite close to Thomas." The emphasis on "quite close" was impossible to miss. Eleanor met the woman's challenging gaze steadily. "A pleasure, Mrs. Morgan." Mr. Blackwood spoke highly of Whispering Pines and its residents in his letters. "Did he?" Judith's perfectly arched eyebrow rose. "How interesting that he never mentioned your correspondence to his friends here." Before the conversation could grow more uncomfortable, Rebecca Harris intervened. "Miss Palmer, Father and I would be honored if you would join us for dinner this afternoon. As Thomas's oldest friend in town, Father has many stories that might help you know the man you were to marry." The invitation, delivered with such genuine warmth, took Eleanor by surprise. "That's very kind, Miss Harris. I would be delighted." "Judith." Morgan's lips thinned with displeasure. "How thoughtful of you, Rebecca. Though I wonder if Sheriff Hayes approves of his primary suspect being entertained by the town's most respected citizens." A shocked silence followed this pronouncement. Dr. Harris's expression hardened. "That was uncalled for, Judith. No one has been named a suspect in Thomas's death." "Not officially, perhaps," Judith replied, her voice carrying just enough to ensure nearby parishioners overheard. "But one must admit the timing is suspicious. A fiancé no one knew about, arriving just after the unfortunate event." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, but years of maintaining composure in difficult situations served her well. "I was on a train from Boston when Mr. Blackwood was killed, Mrs. Morgan. The sheriff can verify my whereabouts easily enough." "Of course," Judith smiled coldly. "Though arranging a murder doesn't necessarily require one's presence, does it?" With that parting shot, she swept away, her daughter trailing behind with an apologetic glance over her shoulder. Dr. Harris sighed heavily. "Please forgive Judith's behavior, Miss Palmer. Thomas's death has affected many in this town, some more personally than others. She had expectations regarding Mr. Blackwood," Eleanor surmised. "Long-standing ones," Rebecca confirmed. "Mother says Mrs. Morgan was quite certain Thomas would eventually propose, especially after she was widowed 2 years ago." "Rebecca," her father admonished gently. "It's all right, Dr. Harris," Eleanor assured him. "I prefer knowing the landscape I'm navigating, socially speaking." The physician studied her with renewed interest. "You're a remarkably practical woman, Miss Palmer. I begin to understand why Thomas was drawn to you." The Harris home proved to be a comfortable 2-story residence near the edge of town, with a separate building behind that served as the doctor's office. Inside, bookshelves lined the walls of the parlor, and scientific instruments shared space with more domestic items, evidence of a household that valued both intellect and comfort over a simple but well-prepared dinner. Dr. Harris shared stories of his 30-year friendship with Thomas Blackwood. They had served together during the war, then decided to seek their fortunes in the West, rather than return to lives that felt too constrained after their experiences. Thomas had a good mind for business, the doctor explained. He built that ranch from nothing, made sound investments in the town's growth. He was respected, even by those who disagreed with him. Were there many who disagreed with him? Eleanor asked. Dr. Harris exchanged a glance with his daughter. Thomas was progressive in his thinking. He advocated for the railroad spur to come directly to Whispering Pines, which would bring growth and commerce. Some of the older residents, including Mayor Morgan, prefer things as they are. The railroad decision is coming before the territorial legislature next month, Rebecca added. Thomas was planning to travel to Helena to speak in favor of it. Eleanor filed this information away. Would his death affect this decision? Possibly, Dr. Harris frowned. Thomas was persuasive, influential with the territorial governor. Without his advocacy, he trailed off, lost in thought. As Rebecca cleared the dishes, Eleanor noticed a chess set on a side table, a game in progress. She crossed to examine it, struck by a sense of familiarity. "Did you play chess with Mr. Blackwood?" Dr. Harris joined her at the table. "Regularly. We had a standing game every Wednesday evening. This was our last match, unfinished now." Eleanor studied the board, then glanced up sharply. "This position, it's identical to the game left on the board in Mr. Blackwood's study." The doctor's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's impossible. Our last game was here in this room. I haven't been to the ranch since before." He trailed off, his expression troubled. "Perhaps he was recreating your game," Rebecca suggested, returning from the kitchen. "Analyzing moves for your next match." "Perhaps," Eleanor agreed, though a doubt colored her tone. Thomas recreating a chess game seemed plausible, but identical board positions suggested something more deliberate. She made a mental note to ask Sheriff Hayes, who had visited Blackwood in the days before his death. As dusk approached, Dr. Harris insisted on escorting Eleanor back to the boarding house. Their walk through town was pleasant, the doctor pointing out buildings and sharing history that Thomas had omitted from his letters. "I must say, Miss Palmer," he commented as they neared Mrs. Sullivan's, "you've handled this situation with remarkable fortitude. Most women would have returned east immediately." "I've never been one to retreat, Doctor," Eleanor replied simply. "And I've invested too much in coming west to abandon the effort so quickly." He studied her thoughtfully. "Thomas mentioned you were practical. I see he wasn't exaggerating." After a pause, he added, "You've been asking questions about his death." It wasn't a question, and Eleanor saw no point in denial. "Wouldn't you in my position?" "Perhaps." His expression grew serious. "But Whispering Pines isn't Boston, Miss Palmer. Small towns have long memories and limited tolerance for those who disturb established patterns, especially women who step beyond expected boundaries. Are you warning me against seeking answers, Dr. Harris?" "I'm suggesting caution," he clarified. "Thomas was my friend. I want his killer found. But I'd hate to see you become a second victim, because you asked the wrong question of the wrong person." His concern seemed genuine, and Eleanor appreciated the candor. "Thank you for your advice, Doctor, and for the dinner. It was kind of you and Miss Harris to include me." "Rebecca liked you immediately," he said with a small smile. "She has good instincts about people, as did Thomas." He tipped his hat. "Good. Evening, Miss Palmer." Later, preparing for bed in her small room, Eleanor reflected on the day's revelations. Judith Morgan's hostility confirmed her as someone with motive to resent Thomas's mail-order bride. The railroad decision suggested larger stakes than personal relationships, and the duplicate chess game. That detail nagged at her analytical mind, suggesting something important just beyond her grasp. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found Rebecca Harris standing in the hallway, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "Miss Harris, is everything all right?" Rebecca glanced nervously down the hallway. "May I come in, just for a moment?" Eleanor stepped aside, puzzled by the young woman's obvious anxiety. Once the door closed, Rebecca spoke in a hushed voice. "I couldn't say this in front of Father, but there's something you should know about Thomas's death." She twisted her hands together. "The night before he was killed, I overheard an argument at the mayor's house. My father was treating the mayor's gout, and I was assisting. I stepped into the hallway and heard voices from his study, Thomas and Mayor Morgan, arguing. About the railroad. Eleanor's interest sharpened. What specifically? Thomas accused the mayor of taking bribes from landowners in Pinecrest, that's the next town over, to oppose the railroad spur to Whispering Pines. The mayor threatened him, said he'd regret making accusations he couldn't prove. Rebecca's voice trembled. The next day, Thomas was dead. "Have you told Sheriff Hayes?" Rebecca shook her head. "Mayor Morgan is his brother-in-law, and without proof." She met Eleanor's gaze directly. "Father says you're observant, that you ask good questions. I thought you should know." With that, she slipped out as quietly as she had come, leaving Eleanor with more questions than answers. Mayor Morgan threatening Thomas Blackwood the night before his murder certainly qualified as significant information, but without proof. As Rebecca said, it was merely hearsay. Eleanor moved to the window, gazing out at the now quiet street. Tomorrow she would begin her position at Peterson's General Store. A respectable occupation, a chance to establish herself in town, but more importantly, a vantage point from which to observe Whispering Pines and its residents. Her groom was beyond help, but his killer was not beyond justice. And despite Dr. Harris's well-intentioned warning, Eleanor Palmer had never been one to leave a puzzle unsolved, even when the pieces suggested a picture more dangerous than she had anticipated. Monday morning dawned clear and crisp, the Montana autumn painting the distant mountains with splashes of gold and crimson. Eleanor arrived at Peterson's General Store 30 minutes before opening, her hair neatly pinned, wearing a practical grey dress suitable for work. Mr. Peterson, Walter, as he insisted she called him, greeted her with obvious relief. "Right on time, Miss Palmer. I've been dreading inventory since my daughter took to her bed with this pregnancy." The store was larger than it appeared from outside, with shelves reaching to the ceiling, stocked with everything from canned goods to farming implements, fabric to firearms. A glass counter displayed jewelry and other valuables, while barrels of flour, sugar, and coffee lined one wall. "I'll show you the ledgers first," Walter said, leading her to a small office at the back. "Been keeping them the same way for 15 years, though I'll admit they've gotten a bit muddled lately." Muddled was an understatement. Eleanor surveyed the chaotic stacks of account books with the practiced eye of someone who had brought order to far worse. During her years managing the elderly widow's household in Boston, she had rescued financial records from near ruin. "I'll start by organizing these chronologically," she said. "Then reconcile the inventory against the purchases and sales." Walter beamed. "Thomas said you had a head for figures. Glad to see he wasn't exaggerating." The casual mention of Thomas caught Eleanor off guard. "You discussed me with Mr. Blackwood." "Of course. When he mentioned he'd sent for a bride, I told him my daughter was expecting and I needed help at the store. He suggested you might be looking for employment when you arrived." Walter's expression softened. "He wanted to make sure you'd be welcome. Here, have options if the ranching life didn't suit." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Eleanor unexpectedly. Thomas Blackwood had considered her comfort, her independence, in ways her letters hadn't revealed. As Walter opened the store, Eleanor set to work on the ledgers. The morning passed quickly, the familiar rhythm of numbers and accounts absorbing her attention. Occasionally customers would enter, and she'd hear Walter's friendly greetings, the murmur of conversation, the ring of the cash register. Around noon, the bell above the door chimed, and a new voice caught her attention, deeper, with a hint of authority. "Morning, Walter. Got that order of nails in yet?" "Sheriff, yes, came in on yesterday's stage. I'll fetch them." Eleanor glanced through the office doorway to see Sheriff Hayes leaning against the counter. He noticed her immediately. "Miss Palmer, Walter mentioned you'd be starting today." She rose, smoothing her skirts. "Sheriff, yes, Mr. Peterson has been kind enough to employ me." "How are you finding our town?" His tone was conversational, but Eleanor detected an undercurrent of assessment. "The people have been most welcoming," she replied, choosing diplomacy over complete honesty. "Dr. Harris and his daughter were kind enough to have me for dinner yesterday." "Ah, the doctor." Hayes nodded. "Good man. Was Thomas's closest friend here?" "So I gathered." Eleanor hesitated, then decided to test the waters. "Sheriff, while examining Mr. Blackwood's study, I noticed a chess game in progress. Dr. Harris mentioned they played regularly, but the game at the ranch matched one at his home. Does that strike you as odd?" Hayes's expression sharpened. "You have a good memory for detail, Miss Palmer. It's a useful habit." She maintained a casual tone. "I just wondered if Mr. Blackwood had visitors the night he died, someone he might have been playing chess with. According to Winters, Thomas was alone that evening." The sheriff's gaze was calculating now. "Your interest in these details is notable." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "My fiancée was murdered, Sheriff. Is it so strange I'd want to understand what happened?" "Not strange," Hayes allowed, "but potentially dangerous." Before she could respond, Walter returned with a package of nails. The sheriff paid, then tipped his hat to them both before departing. "He's been asking questions about you," Walter remarked after Hayes left. Eleanor stiffened. "What sort of questions?" "Nothing alarming. Your background in Boston, your correspondence with Thomas. Standard procedure, I'd imagine, given the circumstances." By mid-afternoon, Eleanor had made considerable progress organizing the ledgers. As she worked through the most recent volume, a name caught her eye: Morgan Enterprises. The entry showed a substantial payment from Thomas Blackwood to the company, dated just 3 weeks before his death. Curious, she checked previous ledgers. Similar payments appeared regularly over the past year, always the same amount, $500. A significant sum, especially for what was listed simply as consulting. When Walter returned from a delivery, Eleanor casually inquired, "Mr. Peterson, what is Morgan Enterprises?" "The mayor's company," he replied, refilling a candy jar. "Handles various investments, property management. Why do you ask?" "Just familiarizing myself with local businesses," she said smoothly. "I noticed Mr. Blackwood made regular payments to them." Walter frowned slightly. "Did he? That's interesting. I wasn't aware they had business dealings." The information simmered in Eleanor's mind as she continued working. Mayor Morgan and Thomas had argued about the railroad the night before his death. Now she discovered regular payments between them. What sort of consulting would justify such amounts? As closing time approached, the bell above the door jangled again. Eleanor looked up to see Jake Winters, the foreman from Blackwood's ranch, removing his hat as he entered. "Afternoon, Walter. Miss Palmer." He nodded to her, surprise evident in his weathered face. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Miss Palmer's helping with the books," Walter explained. "What can I get you, Jake?" "Just some tobacco and coffee." His eyes lingered on Eleanor. "How are you settling in, Mom?" "Well enough, thank you." She hesitated, then added, I've been meaning to thank you properly for keeping Mr. Blackwood's ranch running. It can't be easy." A shadow crossed his face. "Least I could do for the boss. He was a good man to work for." As Walter went to fetch the coffee, Eleanor stepped from behind the counter. "Mr. Winters, might I ask you something about the night Mr. Blackwood died?" Wariness replaced the sadness in his eyes. "What about it?" "You told the sheriff Mr. Blackwood was alone that evening. Are you certain? No visitors at all?" Winters studied her for a long moment. "Why do you ask?" "There was a chess game in progress in his study," Eleanor said, "identical to one at Dr. Harris's home. It seems odd." Something flickered in Winters' expression. Recognition, perhaps. "I check the bunkhouse at sundown, make my rounds. Could have been someone came after." "But you didn't see anyone?" He hesitated fractionally. "No, ma'am." Eleanor sensed he was withholding something, but Walter's return prevented further questions. As Winters paid for his purchases, she noticed his hands, calloused from ranch work, but with clean, well-trimmed nails, not the rough hands one might expect from a lifetime cowboy. After he left, Walter shook his head. "Poor Jake. Thomas's death hit him harder than most. They had a special relationship, more like partners than boss and foreman." "How long had he worked for Mr. Blackwood?" Eleanor asked. "From the beginning. Came west with Thomas and Dr. Harris. After the war. The three of them were thick as thieves in the early days. This was new information. Dr. Harris didn't mention Mr. Winters was part of their original group." Walter shrugged. "The doctor and Thomas were the gentlemen, Jake the hired help, though Thomas never treated him that way, even made him executor of his will." Eleanor's attention sharpened. "His will? Has it been read yet?" "Not that I've heard, though there's been speculation." Walter lowered his voice. "Some thought Thomas might leave something to Judith Morgan. They were close at one time, before you, of course." As Eleanor walked back to the boarding house that evening, her mind buzzed with new questions. The payments to Morgan Enterprises, the identical chess games, Jake Winters' hesitation when asked about visitors, and now the revelation that Winters was executor of Thomas's will. She was so absorbed in thought that she didn't notice the figure approaching until a sharp voice cut through her reverie. "Miss Palmer. A word, if you please." Eleanor looked up to find Judith Morgan blocking her path, exquisitely dressed as before, her expression unyielding. "Mrs. Morgan, good evening. Is it, I wonder?" Judith's voice dripped with barely concealed hostility. "I understand you've been asking questions about Thomas, about his business, his visitors, even his will. One might think you're looking for something specific." Eleanor kept her expression neutral. "I'm simply trying to understand the man I was to marry." "After his death," Judith countered. "How convenient." "There's nothing convenient about my situation, Mrs. Morgan." Judith stepped closer, her perfume heavy in the evening air. "Let me be clear, Miss Palmer. Whatever you think you're entitled to as Thomas's fiancée, you're mistaken. You were nothing to him. A business arrangement, a practical solution for a man who needed a housekeeper with the respectability of a wife." The words were meant to wound, but Eleanor had developed thick skin during her years in Boston society. "You seem to have given this considerable thought, Mrs. Morgan." "I knew Thomas for 8 years, Judith hissed. "We had an understanding before you appeared with your letters and Eastern airs." "If that's true," Eleanor replied steadily, "then I wonder why he felt the need to advertise for a bride at all." Fury flashed in Judith's eyes. "You would do well to return east, Miss Palmer, before you discover how unwelcome you truly are." With that, she swept past, leaving Eleanor with the distinct impression that she had just been threatened. Yet, beneath her concern, a certain satisfaction bloomed. Judith Morgan's reaction suggested Eleanor's questions were making someone nervous. At the boarding house, a surprise awaited. Rebecca Harris sat in the parlor, rising quickly when Eleanor entered. "Miss Palmer, I was beginning to think you weren't coming." "Miss Harris, is everything all right?" Rebecca glanced toward the kitchen, where Mrs. Sullivan could be heard preparing dinner. "I needed to speak with you, privately, about what I told you yesterday." Eleanor nodded, leading the young woman upstairs to her room. Once the door closed, Rebecca pulled a small leather-bound book from her reticule. "This was among Father's papers," she said, her voice low. "I found it this morning when organizing his desk. It's Thomas's journal from the last few months. Eleanor's." Pulse quickened. "Your father had Mr. Blackwood's journal. Why?" "I don't know. It was hidden behind medical texts." Rebecca's expression was troubled. Father and Thomas were close, but this seems unusual. Eleanor accepted the journal, feeling its weight, physically light but heavy with potential answers. "Have you read it?" "Just enough to know it might be important." Rebecca twisted her hands nervously. "There are entries about the railroad vote, about Mayor Morgan, and about someone called J.W. The initials struck Eleanor immediately. Jake Winters? But why would Thomas refer to his foreman by initials in a private journal? "Thank you for bringing this to me," she said. "But why not take it to Sheriff Hayes?" Rebecca's expression darkened. "I told you, he's the mayor's brother-in-law. And there's something else." She lowered her voice further. "Last night, I overheard Father and the mayor arguing. The mayor was angry, said Father needed to control his daughter before I caused problems. They mentioned you." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. "Me? Why?" "They didn't say specifically, but the mayor seemed concerned about us speaking yesterday." Rebecca moved toward the door. "I should go before I'm missed, but be careful, Miss Palmer. Thomas trusted the wrong person, and it cost him his life." After Rebecca departed, Eleanor sat on her bed, the journal unopened beside her. The warning echoed in her mind. Thomas trusted the wrong person. Could it have been Dr. Harris, his oldest friend, Jake Winters, his loyal foreman, Mayor Morgan, his business associate, or someone else entirely? With determined fingers, she opened the journal to the most recent entry, dated the day before Thomas's death. "Meeting with M went poorly," she read. "He denies everything, claims the documents are forgeries. But J.W. confirms their authenticity. Must proceed with caution now. Too much at stake to back down, especially with E arriving soon. If anything happens to me, all evidence is with J.W. God willing, it won't come to that. E arriving soon. Eleanor." Thomas had been concerned for his safety the very day before his murder, and he'd entrusted some kind of evidence to J.W. The pieces were beginning to align, forming a picture more complex and dangerous than she had imagined. Thomas hadn't been killed simply out of jealousy or personal rivalry. Something bigger was at stake, something involving documents, evidence, and the railroad that could change the future of Whispering Pines. Eleanor closed the journal. Decision made. Tomorrow she would seek out Jake Winters privately. If he was the J.W. mentioned, he might have the evidence Thomas had referenced, evidence that could identify a killer. As she prepared for bed, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside her room. Eleanor froze, listening. Soft footsteps moved past her door, then descended the stairs. Someone had been listening. Sleep eluded Eleanor that night. She read Thomas's journal cover to cover, looking for clues among his methodical entries. Most pertained to ranch business, cattle purchases, breeding records, worker payments, but interspersed were cryptic references to the arrangement with M and meetings with J.W. Regarding documents, the final week of entries proved most illuminating. Thomas had discovered something troubling about the railroad negotiations, apparent bribes paid by neighboring Pinecrest's landowners to divert the planned route away from Whispering Pines. Mayor Morgan featured prominently, referred to simply as M in most entries. M continues to deny involvement despite evidence. One entry read, claims he's being framed. Possible, but unlikely given financial records JW. Obtained. Eleanor rose early, formulating a plan. She needed to speak with Jake Winters away from prying eyes and ears. The ranch was too far to visit before her workday began, but perhaps she could send a message asking him to meet her. The question was, where and how to ensure the message reached only him. Mrs. Sullivan provided an unexpected solution at breakfast. Mr. Winters will be collecting supplies at Peterson's today, she mentioned casually, buttering her toast. Seems they're short-handed. At the ranch since Thomas's passing. 2 hands quit last week, headed for the mining camps. That seems odd, Eleanor remarked, to leave steady employment so suddenly. Mrs. Sullivan shrugged. Happens this time of year. Some men get restless before winter sets in. At the store, Eleanor threw herself into work, organizing inventory, while keeping an eye on the front door. Around mid-morning the bell jangled, and Jake Winters entered, nodding briefly to Walter before approaching the counter with a supply list. Eleanor waited until Walter stepped into the storeroom before approaching. Mr. Winters, might I have a word with you, in private? Wariness creased his weathered face. About what, ma'am? About J.W. and the evidence Thomas entrusted to you before his death. The color drained from Winters' face. He glanced toward the storeroom, then back at Eleanor. Not here, he said quietly. Too many ears. Meet me at the livery stable at noon. Say you're checking on rental horses. Walter returned, and Winters resumed his business transaction as though nothing had happened. Eleanor busied herself with ledgers, heart racing. Her instinct had been correct. Winters was indeed the mysterious J.W., and he did have evidence related to Thomas's death. At noon, she informed Walter she needed to inquire about horses for a possible trip to Helena. He seemed surprised, but asked no questions as she donned her shawl and headed out. The livery stable sat at the edge of town, a large, weathered structure smelling of hay and horses. As Eleanor approached, she scanned her surroundings carefully, mindful that someone had been listening outside her door the previous night. The street appeared normal, women shopping, men conducting business, children playing. Inside the dim stable, she found Jake Winters waiting in an empty stall at the back, away from the few workers brushing down horses near the entrance. And taking a risk, asking questions so openly, he said without preamble. No more than you agreeing to meet me, Eleanor countered. You're J.W., aren't you? The person Thomas trusted with evidence about Mayor Morgan and the railroad bribes. Winters' eyes narrowed. How do you know about that? Thomas kept a journal. He mentioned you by your initials. His journal? Shock registered on Winters' face. Where did you find it? It was in Dr. Harris's possession, Eleanor explained. His daughter brought it to me. Winters muttered something under his breath. Should have known. Thomas trusted the doc too much. Were those misplaced trust? Eleanor asked directly. Was Dr. Harris involved in Thomas's death? Not directly, no, but he's compromised. Winters leaned against the stall door, weighing his words carefully. You need to understand something about Whispering Pines, Miss Palmer. It looks like a typical frontier town, but there's more going. On beneath the surface, the railroad, Eleanor prompted. Winters nodded. Whoever gets that spur line controls the future of this region. Millions in potential profits, Pinecrest's major landowners, led by Victor Harrington, have been bribing officials to reroute the line through their town instead. And Mayor Morgan is accepting these bribes? Thomas had proof, banking records showing payments from Harrington's company to Morgan's personal accounts. Property deeds signed over to shell companies that trace back to the mayor, all timed around key votes and decisions about the railroad route. Eleanor processed this information. And you obtained these records? How? A ghost of a smile crossed Winters' weathered face. I wasn't always a ranch foreman, Miss Palmer. Thomas and I met during the war. I worked in Army intelligence, tracking Confederate supply movements. After the war, I did some work for the Pinkerton Agency. The revelation stunned Eleanor. "You're a detective," he corrected. "Thomas saved my life during a case that went wrong, offered me a new start out here, away from enemies I'd made. Most folks just see a simple ranch hand, which suits me fine. And the evidence you collected about Mayor Morgan?" Winter's expression darkened, hidden. "Thomas and I agreed it was safer if only I knew the location. The day before he died, he told me if anything happened to him, I should take the evidence to the territorial governor." "But you haven't," Eleanor observed, "been watching, waiting." His eyes met hers directly. "Wanted to understand who pulled the trigger before I made my move. This goes deeper than just Morgan." "What do you mean?" "The mayor's not smart enough to orchestrate a murder this clean. No witnesses, no evidence left behind. Professional job." Winters lowered his voice further. "There's someone else involved, someone with experience." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine as the implications became clear. "You think there's a hired killer in Whispering Pines?" "Or someone with a similar background to mine," Winters confirmed. "Thomas was shot with precision, one bullet, through the heart. No hesitation, no struggle. That takes training." Eleanor thought of her observations at the crime scene. The lack of disturbance, the way Thomas had apparently been sitting calmly at his desk when shot. The killer was someone he knew, someone he trusted enough to turn his back on. Winters nodded grimly. "That's why I've been careful, why I haven't revealed what I know, even to the sheriff." "Because he's the mayor's brother-in-law," Eleanor said, recalling Rebecca's warning. "Among other reasons." Winters checked his pocket watch. "We've talked too long. People will notice." "Wait!" Eleanor caught his arm as he turned to leave. "Why tell me all this? You barely know me." Winters studied her for a long moment. "Thomas's last letter to me, before he was killed. He mentioned you were observant, trained to notice details others missed. Said you'd assisted a police inspector. In Boston with casework?" Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks. "I merely helped with filing and organization." "That's not how Thomas told it." Winters smiled faintly. "Said you had the sharpest mind he'd encountered in correspondence. He was impressed by your analytical skills, your attention to detail. Thought you'd make a good partner in more ways than one." The notion that Thomas had valued her mind, had seen beyond her practical qualifications as a potential wife, touched Eleanor deeply. She had come west, seeking security and partnership. It seemed Thomas Blackwood had been seeking the same with a woman whose intelligence matched his own. "What happens now?" she asked. "I continue gathering information," Winters replied, "and you keep your head down. Stop asking obvious questions. Your interest in Thomas's death has been noticed." "By whom?" "By everyone." His expression was grave. "You're not in Boston anymore, Miss Palmer. This is frontier justice. If the wrong people believe you know too much, they won't hesitate to create another tragic accident." The warning sent a chill through Eleanor. "We can't just do nothing. Thomas deserves justice." "And he'll get it," Winters assured her, "but carefully, methodically. The evidence needs to reach the territorial governor intact, along with whoever pulled the trigger." He hesitated, then added, "Thomas would want you safe above all else." A noise from the front of the stable, voices approaching, cut their conversation. "Short, meet me at the creek bridge tomorrow at dawn," Winters whispered. "I'll show you the evidence." He slipped out through a back door as Eleanor composed herself, smoothing her skirts and adopting a casual posture, examining a gentle-looking mare in a nearby stall. Moments later, Sheriff Hayes entered, accompanied by a tall, distinguished man Eleanor hadn't met, perhaps in his 50s, with a trim silver beard and expensive clothing. "Miss Palmer," Hayes said, surprise evident in his tone. "Walter mentioned you were inquiring about horses." "Yes," Eleanor replied calmly. "I thought I might need transportation if I decide to stay in the area. Mrs. Sullivan suggested the livery stable. The sheriff's expression suggested he didn't entirely believe her explanation. "Miss Palmer, allow me to introduce Victor Harrington. He owns the sheep ranch neighboring Blackwood's property, so this was the man Winters had named as the mastermind behind the Pinecrest bribes." Eleanor extended her hand politely. "Mr. Harrington, a pleasure." Harrington's grip was firm, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Miss Palmer, my condolences on your loss. Thomas was a formidable neighbor, though we disagreed on certain matters." "The railroad, perhaps?" Eleanor suggested innocently. Something dangerous flickered in Harrington's eyes. "Among other things, you seem well informed for someone newly arrived." "I take an interest in my surroundings," Eleanor replied evenly. "Indeed," Harrington's gaze was assessing. "I understand you've taken employment at Peterson's store, a curious choice for a woman who expected to be mistress of the largest cattle ranch in the territory." The implied criticism was clear, but Eleanor merely smiled. "I've always believed in self-sufficiency, Mr. Harrington, a quality Thomas admired, according to his letters." "Yes, well," Harrington's smile thinned. "We all have our unexpected adjustments to make. Thomas's death has created complications for many in Whispering Pines." "The railroad vote, for instance?" Eleanor couldn't resist prodding. Harrington's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into practiced affability. "You have an unusual interest in local politics, Miss Palmer. Most young ladies find such matters tedious." "I find most matters interesting, Mr. Harrington, especially those that might relate to unexpected deaths." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Miss Palmer, if you're finished with your inquiries here, perhaps I could escort you back to Peterson's. I'd hate for Walter to be short-handed longer than necessary." The dismissal was transparent, but Eleanor recognized the wisdom in retreat. She had already revealed too much of her knowledge to both men. "Of course, Sheriff. Mr. Harrington, a pleasure meeting you." As Hayes walked her out, his voice was low and urgent. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Palmer. Harrington is not a man to antagonize." "Is that a warning or a threat, Sheriff?" Hayes stopped, turning to face her directly. "It's advice from someone who's seen what happens to people who challenge the established order here. Whatever you think you know about Thomas's death, whatever you're investigating with Winters, yes, I know you met him here. Let it go. For your own safety." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "And if I don't?" "Then I can't guarantee what happens next." His expression softened slightly. "Thomas wouldn't want you risking yourself this way." "You seem very certain of what Thomas would want," Eleanor observed, "for a man you claim wasn't particularly close to you." Something unreadable crossed Hayes's face. "We all have our parts to play in this town, Miss Palmer. I suggest you consider carefully what yours should be." With that cryptic statement, he tipped his hat and turned back toward the livery stable, leaving Eleanor alone on the street with the distinct impression that she had just been warned off. By both sides of the railroad dispute, as she walked back toward Peterson's store, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Glancing up, she caught a glimpse of Judith Morgan in her dress shop window, observing her progress down the street with undisguised hostility. The journal hidden in her room, the promise of evidence from Winters at dawn tomorrow, the warning from the sheriff, all pointed to a conspiracy larger and more dangerous than she had initially suspected. A conspiracy that had already claimed Thomas's life, and might claim hers if she wasn't extraordinarily careful. Yet beneath her fear, Eleanor felt a familiar sense of purpose awakening. In Boston, her analytical skills had been dismissed, her observations relegated to women's fancies. Here in Whispering Pines, those same abilities might bring a killer to justice if she survived long enough to piece together the truth. The darkness before dawn shrouded Whispering Pines in silence. Eleanor slipped from the boarding house, a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the autumn chill. She had barely slept, her mind occupied with the revelations from Winters and the warnings from Sheriff Hayes. The creek bridge lay at the eastern edge of town, where the main road crossed a narrow but swift-moving stream. In spring, according to Mrs. Sullivan, it often flooded, cutting off the eastern trail. Now, in early autumn, the water ran clear and cold beneath the wooden planks. Eleanor arrived first, the appointed hour still several minutes away. She positioned herself beneath a large cottonwood tree, affording a view of both the bridge and the road into town. Years of assisting with investigations in Boston had taught her the value of observing her surroundings, especially when meeting an informant. The eastern sky lightened gradually, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. No sign of Winters yet. A niggling worry began to form in Eleanor's mind. Had he been intercepted, prevented from coming? A twig snapped in the brush behind her. Eleanor whirled, heart pounding, to find Rebecca Harris emerging from the shadows, her face pale in the dim light. "Miss Harris, what are you doing here?" "Following you," Rebecca admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw you leave the boarding house and was concerned. It's not safe for you to be out alone." Eleanor studied, the younger woman weighing her apparent sincerity against the possibility of deception. "How did you happen to be watching the boarding house at this hour?" Rebecca's cheeks colored slightly. "I couldn't sleep. I've been worried since bringing you Thomas's journal. When I saw your light and then watched you leave." She trailed off, glancing nervously toward the bridge. "Are you meeting someone?" Before Eleanor could respond, the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot echoed across the creek. Both women instinctively ducked as a second shot followed. "Stay here," Eleanor commanded, gathering her skirts and moving cautiously toward the bridge. "Miss Palmer, don't," Rebecca hissed, but Eleanor was already advancing, keeping low and using trees for cover. The shots had come from the far side of the creek. As she reached the bridge, a dark shape on the weathered planks brought her up short. A man lay face down, unnaturally still. Even in the dim light, Eleanor recognized Jake Winters' buckskin jacket. Caution warred with urgency. The shooter could still be watching, waiting for anyone investigating the sound. But if Winters was still alive, he needed immediate help. Eleanor made her decision, darting onto the bridge in a crouch. She reached Winters and gently turned him over, fingers automatically seeking a pulse at his neck. Nothing. The former detective stared sightlessly at the lightening sky. A single bullet, hole centered precisely over his heart, just like Thomas. A professional shot, she thought grimly. Just as Winters had described Thomas's murder, something was clutched in his right hand. A leather pouch held in a death grip. Eleanor worked it free quickly, aware of her vulnerable position on the exposed bridge. Inside, she found a folded packet of papers and a small key. Footsteps approached rapidly from the town direction. Eleanor barely had time to tuck the pouch into her bodice before Sheriff Hayes appeared, revolver drawn. "Miss Palmer, get away from there!" he shouted, advancing cautiously. Eleanor rose slowly, hands visible. "It's Jake Winters, Sheriff. He's been shot. I heard the shots and came to investigate." Hayes approached, keeping her in his line of sight, while he knelt to check Winters. His grim expression confirmed what Eleanor already knew. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" he demanded, holstering his weapon. "I couldn't sleep. I was walking by the creek," Eleanor lied smoothly. "I heard shots and found him like this." Hayes's eyes narrowed skeptically. "A convenient morning stroll, directly to where Blackwood's foreman happens to be murdered." "Sheriff!" Rebecca emerged from the trees, her appearance providing a timely distraction. "I heard gunshots. Is someone hurt?" Hayes looked between the two women, suspicion evident. "Miss Harris, another early riser, I see." Rebecca approached, gasping as she saw Winters' body. "Oh no, is that Mr. Winters?" "Ladies, I'm going to need both of you to return to town immediately," Hayes ordered. "Report to my office in 1 hour. Don't speak to anyone about what you've seen here." As they walked back toward town, Rebecca whispered urgently, "Did he have it? The evidence?" Eleanor kept her expression neutral. "Not here. We're likely being watched." News of Winter's murder spread through Whispering Pines like wildfire. By the time Eleanor reached Peterson's store after her interview with the sheriff, Walter had already heard. "Shot at the creek bridge," he said, shaking his head sadly. "First Thomas, now Jake. What's happening to our town?" Eleanor maintained. The story she'd given Hayes, a sleepless night, an early morning walk, the shocking discovery. The sheriff had seemed skeptical, but had no grounds to challenge her account, especially with Rebecca corroborating parts of it. Throughout the morning, Eleanor was acutely aware of the evidence hidden in her room at the boarding house. During a quiet moment when Walter was helping a customer, she examined the small key she'd kept in her pocket. It appeared to be for a safety deposit box, its head stamped with WP Bank and the number 27. Whispering Pines had only one bank, a solid brick building on Main Street. Eleanor had noticed it her first day in town. The question was how to access Box 27 without raising suspicions. At midday, Dr. Harris entered the store, his face grave. He nodded to Eleanor, purchasing a tin of coffee before approaching her directly. "Miss Palmer, a word, if I may." She followed him to a quiet corner of the store. "Yes, doctor, this business with Winters is troubling," he said quietly. "Coming so soon after Thomas's death. I understand you found the body." "Unfortunately, yes. An awful coincidence." Harris studied her intently. "Rebecca mentioned you've been asking questions about Thomas's murder, about the railroad dispute." Eleanor maintained her composure. "Natural curiosity, I suppose, trying to understand the circumstances. Some curiosities are better left unsatisfied." Harris lowered his voice further. "Thomas was involved in matters beyond simple ranching, dangerous matters. His death was no random act of violence." "You believe he was deliberately targeted?" "I know he was." Harris's eyes held a warning, as was Winter's. "As you might be if you continue along this path." Eleanor decided to test the waters. "What do you know about the evidence Thomas collected, about Mayor Morgan's dealings with Victor Harrington?" The doctor paled visibly. "Where did you hear those names together?" "Thomas kept a journal, Doctor. The same journal you had in your possession until your daughter brought it to me." Harris closed his eyes briefly. "Rebecca should never have done that. She doesn't understand the danger, and you do, more than you know." He gripped her arm urgently. "Listen to me carefully, Miss Palmer. Thomas discovered corruption that reaches beyond Whispering Pines, beyond Montana territory even. Railroad. Money has tentacles everywhere, including territorial government. He thought he could fight it with evidence, with legal channels, and you disagreed? I counseled caution, suggested he sell his ranch to Harrington, take his money elsewhere." Harris's expression turned pained. "We argued about it the night before he died. It was the first serious disagreement in 30 years of friendship." Eleanor processed this new information carefully. "Why did you have his journal?" "He gave it to me for safekeeping, along with some letters. Said, if anything happened to him, I should know where to look." Harris glanced around nervously. "I never expected. I thought he was being paranoid. And now I think we're all in danger." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Winters spoke to you yesterday, didn't he? At the livery stable?" Eleanor didn't bother denying it. "Yes. Did he give you anything? Documents? Keys?" The directness of the question put Eleanor on alert. If Harris was truly Thomas's friend, why did he seem so anxious about evidence that might identify his killer? "No," she lied. "We never finished our conversation." Relief flickered across the doctor's face, so briefly she might have imagined it. "Good, that's good. Stay out of this, Miss Palmer, for your own safety." As he turned to leave, Eleanor took a calculated risk. Doctor, did Thomas play chess with anyone besides you? I'm still puzzled by the identical board positions in your home and his study. Harris hesitated. Not to my knowledge. Why? Just curious. It seemed an odd coincidence. The doctor studied her for a moment longer. There are no coincidences in murder, Miss Palmer. Remember that. After he left, Eleanor couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Harris's warning seemed genuine, yet he had been relieved to hear she didn't have Winter's evidence, and he had been at Thomas's ranch the night before the murder, by his own admission. When her workday ended, Eleanor walked briskly to the bank, arriving 15 minutes before closing. A portly teller greeted her with professional courtesy. "Good afternoon, miss. How may I assist you?" Eleanor summoned her most composed demeanor. "I believe Mr. Blackwood arranged a safety deposit box for my use upon my arrival. Box 27. The teller consulted a ledger. "Ah, yes. Mr. Blackwood did indeed reserve box 27 for a Miss Eleanor Palmer. I'll need to see some identification, miss." Eleanor presented her train ticket and the letters from Thomas that she carried in her reticule. After examination, the teller nodded. "Everything appears in order. Please follow me." In a private room, the teller inserted his key into the box, then allowed Eleanor to use hers. "I'll leave you to your privacy, miss. Ring the bell when you're finished." Alone with the box, Eleanor lifted the lid with trembling fingers. Inside lay a large envelope sealed with wax, addressed to Governor William Potts, Helena, Montana Territory, and marked "Confidential." Beside it was a smaller envelope with her name written in what she presumed was Thomas's handwriting. She opened her envelope first, unfolding a single sheet of paper. "My dear Eleanor, if you are reading this, circumstances have likely taken a dire turn. The larger envelope contains evidence of corruption that threatens not just Whispering Pines, but the entire territory's development. Trust no one with this information except Governor Potts himself. I regret that our planned life together has been disrupted, but know that your qualities, intelligence, resourcefulness, attention to detail, are precisely why I sought you as a partner. These same qualities may now serve a different purpose. The enemy has many faces, some wearing the mask of friendship. Beware especially those who seek to protect you from knowledge. With highest regards, Thomas Blackwood." Eleanor folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her bodice alongside the document pouch from Winters. The warning was clear. Thomas had anticipated the possibility of his death and prepared accordingly, and he had specifically cautioned her against those claiming to act for her protection. Dr. Harris's face flashed in her mind. She examined the sealed envelope without breaking. The wax! This was the evidence that had gotten Thomas killed, that Winters had died delivering to her. Its contents needed to reach the territorial governor intact, as both men had intended. But how? Helena was over 100 miles away, a journey that would require several days by stagecoach through potentially dangerous territory, and she couldn't leave immediately without raising suspicions. Eleanor returned the sealed envelope to the box and locked it. She would need to formulate a plan, one that accounted for enemies hiding behind friendly faces. As she exited the bank, the sun was setting, casting long shadows down Main Street. The usual evening activities of Whispering Pines were underway. Men gathering at the saloon, families returning home for supper, shopkeepers closing up for the night. Yet something felt different. Eleanor couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Glancing around casually, she spotted Sheriff Hayes across the street, apparently engaged in conversation with the blacksmith, but his eyes tracking her movement. Outside the dress shop, Judith Morgan stood arranging a display, her gaze similarly fixed on Eleanor's progress down the street, and most worrisome of all, a rider she didn't recognize sat motionless on horseback at the far end of town, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Something about his stillness, His patient observation sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. Thomas's words echoed in her mind. The enemy has many faces. How many of those faces were watching her now, waiting for her to lead them to the evidence? How many would be willing to add a third murder to cover their crimes? As she reached the boarding house, Eleanor made a decision. She would need to leave Whispering Pines, and soon. But first, she needed an ally, someone outside the web of corruption and murder that had ensnared the town. Her mind turned to Rebecca Harris. The young woman had already taken risks bringing her Thomas's journal. But was she truly independent of her father's influence or another deceptive face in this deadly game? Eleanor climbed the steps to the boarding house, her resolution firm. By this time tomorrow, she would be on her way to Helena with the evidence, or she would be the next victim in Whispering Pines' bloody conspiracy. That evening at dinner, Eleanor maintained a carefully normal demeanor despite her racing thoughts. Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house table was buzzing with discussion of Jake Winter's murder. 2 killings in as many weeks. Mr. Peterson shook his head gravely. Never seen the like in Whispering Pines. Sheriff thinks it might be drifters, offered Mr. Collins, the telegraph operator. Said he's sending wires to neighboring towns to be on lookout. Eleanor kept her eyes on her plate, aware that any reaction might betray her knowledge. She ate mechanically, her mind working on the problem of how to reach Helena without alerting those who watched her. Miss Palmer, Mrs. Sullivan's voice broke through her thoughts. You poor dear, finding the body like that, how are you holding up? All eyes turned to Eleanor, expressions ranging from sympathy to barely disguised suspicion. As well as can be expected, she replied evenly. Though I hardly knew Mr. Winters, it was a shocking discovery. Quite a coincidence, remarked Mrs. Fincher, a pinch-faced woman who taught at the town school. First your fiancé, then his foreman, both connected to you. The insinuation hung in the air, but Eleanor refused to acknowledge it. The sheriff is investigating. I'm sure he'll discover the true connection. After dinner, Eleanor retreated to her room, locking the door before retrieving Thomas's letter and Winter's document pouch from their hiding place. She examined the papers Winters had clutched so desperately in death. They contained banking records, showing substantial transfers from Harrington Enterprises to accounts held by Mayor Morgan and, surprisingly, Sheriff Hayes. Accompanying these were surveyors' maps of proposed railroad routes with handwritten calculations of property values before and after the railroad's construction. The figures were staggering. Land currently worth dollars per acre would become worth hundreds once the railroad came through. Whoever controlled the land along the chosen route stood to make a fortune. A soft knock at her door startled Eleanor. She quickly concealed the documents beneath her mattress before answering. Rebecca Harris stood in the hallway, her expression tense. May I come in, briefly? Eleanor hesitated, then stepped aside. After closing the door, she turned to find Rebecca pacing anxiously. Father knows, the young woman whispered. About the bank. He saw you leaving and became agitated. How do you know this? I overheard him speaking with Mayor Morgan afterward. They mentioned Helena and stopping her before she can ruin everything. Rebecca's eyes were wide with fear. Miss Palmer, I think you're in immediate danger. Eleanor assessed the younger woman carefully. Why are you telling me this? Dr. Harris is your father. Because this isn't the man who raised me, Rebecca replied, her voice breaking slightly. Since Thomas died, he's changed. Secretive, nervous. And this morning, after Winters was found, she swallowed hard. I saw him burning papers in his office fireplace. You think he's involved in the murders? I don't know. Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes. I hope not. But something is terribly wrong, and I can't ignore it anymore. Eleanor, made a swift decision. I need to leave Whispering Pines tonight if possible. The stage doesn't run until Thursday. Then I'll need a horse. Eleanor began mentally cataloguing what she would take. And to avoid being followed, Rebecca nodded decisively. I can help. Father keeps horses at our home. I could bring one to the back of the boarding house around midnight. Why would you take such a risk? Because Thomas was kind to me. He encouraged my interest in medicine when others scoffed. Her expression hardened. And because if my father is involved in murder, I want the truth exposed, no matter how painful. They quickly formulated a plan. Eleanor would slip out at midnight, taking only what she could carry in a small bag. Rebecca would bring a horse and basic supplies for the journey to Helena. Travel north first, Rebecca advised. There's a small settlement called Cooper's Creek, about 20 miles up. From there, you can take the stage road east to Helena. It's longer, but you'll avoid the main routes where they might look for you. After Rebecca left, Eleanor packed methodically a change of clothes, Thomas's letter, Winter's documents, and the small amount of money she had brought from Boston. She wrote a brief note to Walter Peterson, apologizing for her sudden departure, citing family matters requiring her immediate return east. Around 11, as the boarding house settled into silence, Eleanor changed into her simplest traveling dress and sturdy boots. She plaited her hair tightly and donned a dark shawl that would help conceal her in the night. As midnight approached, she eased her window open, relieved to find her room face the back of the property where delivery wagons sometimes parked. She would need to climb down the trellis, not ideal in skirts, but manageable. Eleanor was securing her small bag when a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside her room. She froze, listening intently. Soft footsteps paused at her door, followed by the subtle sound of the handle being tested. Finding it locked, the unseen visitor remained still for several long moments before moving away. Her heart pounding, Eleanor waited until silence returned before resuming her preparations. Someone had been checking whether she was in her room, or perhaps planning to enter uninvited. The possibility confirmed the urgency of her departure. At precisely midnight, she spotted a hooded figure leading a saddled horse into the shadowed area behind the boarding house. Rebecca had come through. Eleanor carefully climbed out her window and down the trellis, wincing as the wooden structure creaked under her weight. Once on the ground, she hurried toward the waiting horse. "Rebecca," she whispered, approaching the hooded figure. The figure turned, lowering the hood to reveal not Rebecca's youthful face, but Sheriff Hayes. "Evening, Miss Palmer," he said quietly. "Going somewhere?" Eleanor's blood ran cold. "Sheriff, I was just getting some air. Fully dressed with a traveling bag, climbing down from your window." His smile held no humor. "I think not." "How did you know?" "Rebecca Harris isn't as subtle as she thinks. My deputy saw her leaving your room earlier. Wasn't hard to piece together what might be happening." He gestured to the horse. "She did provide the mount, though unwittingly. We intercepted her about 20 minutes ago." "Is she harmed?" Eleanor demanded. "She's fine, currently explaining to her father why she was stealing his horse." Hayes stepped closer. "The question is, what to do with you?" Eleanor calculated her options. Running was pointless. Screaming might wake the boarding house, but could also get her killed immediately if Hayes was indeed part of the conspiracy. "What do you want, Sheriff?" "The evidence Winters gave you this morning, and whatever you found at the bank, so he knew about both." Eleanor's estimation of her situation darkened further. "And if I give these things to you," Hayes sighed, "then maybe this ends without more bloodshed." "You mean you'd let me leave town?" Eleanor asked skeptically. "I mean you'd stay alive, Miss Palmer." His hand moved to rest on his holstered pistol, which seems a fair trade for some papers. "Papers that prove conspiracy and murder," Eleanor countered. "That show you received money from Victor Harrington alongside Mayor Morgan." Hayes's expression tightened. "You've been busy today." Thomas and Winters were murdered to conceal these crimes. I'd be a fool to think surrendering the evidence would save me. You're a fool if you think you can escape Whispering Pines with it, Hayes retorted. Every road is watched. The telegraph lines run through our office. You'd never reach Helena. Eleanor considered her limited options. What if we made a different arrangement, one that benefits us both? Interest flickered in Hayes's eyes. I'm listening. The evidence remains concealed for now, Eleanor proposed. You escort me safely to Helena, where I have business unrelated to these matters. Once there, we go our separate ways. And I'm supposed to trust you won't head straight to the governor. You'd be with me the entire journey, and I give you my word. Hayes laughed softly. A clever attempt, Miss Palmer, but insufficient. He drew his pistol. I'll need you to come with me now. Quietly. The click of a rifle being cocked cut through the night air. Lower your weapon, Sheriff, came a woman's voice from the shadows, or I'll put a bullet through you where you stand. Eleanor turned to see Mrs. Sullivan emerging from behind a storage shed, a rifle held with the confidence of long familiarity. Mrs. Sullivan. Hayes seemed genuinely shocked. This doesn't concern you. A corrupt sheriff threatening a guest in my yard absolutely concerns me. The widow's voice was steel. Miss Palmer, step away from him, please. As Eleanor moved toward her landlady, Hayes made a swift decision, holstering his pistol. You're making a mistake, Margaret. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand murder, Mrs. Sullivan replied coldly. First Thomas, then Jake Winters. Good men both. And now you're hunting down a woman whose only crime was asking questions. She gestured with the rifle. Miss Palmer, take the horse. Go now. Eleanor didn't need to be told twice. She mounted quickly, adjusting her skirts around the saddle. Hayes won't be the only one looking for you, Mrs. Sullivan warned. Head north to my sister's place in Cooper's Creek, Martha Sullivan. Tell her I sent you. She'll help get you to Helena. Why are you helping me? Eleanor asked, stunned by this unexpected alliance. Mrs. Sullivan's expression softened momentarily. Thomas Blackwood was my nephew. He wrote to me about you, said you were special, different from other women he'd met. Her eyes hardened as she looked back at Hayes. Family helps family, now go. As Eleanor urged the horse forward, she heard Hayes call after her, This isn't over, Palmer. You won't make it to Helena. She rode into the darkness, leaving Whispering Pines behind, the evidence secure against her body. The road to Helena, and justice, lay ahead, but so did unknown dangers and pursuers who had already proven their willingness to kill. Thomas's written words echoed in her mind. The enemy has many faces. Now she knew that those faces included the town's sheriff, and possibly Dr. Harris, but they also included unexpected allies like Mrs. Sullivan. As the horse settled into a steady rhythm beneath her, Eleanor felt a surprising sense of purpose. She had come west seeking marriage and security. Instead, she had found murder and conspiracy. Yet somehow, this dangerous path felt strangely right, as if all her years of observing details, analyzing evidence, and being dismissed for her keen mind had been preparation for precisely this moment. The night was dark, but the moon provided enough light to see the road ahead. Eleanor Palmer, mail-order bride turned detective, rode north toward Cooper's Creek, the first stop on her journey to expose a deadly conspiracy and bring her murdered fiancé's killers to justice. 3 days of hard riding had left Eleanor exhausted but resolute. Martha Sullivan in Cooper's Creek had provided fresh horses and a male escort. Her son, Michael, a quiet man with sharp eyes and a rifle he clearly knew how to use. Together, they had taken the back trails toward Helena, avoiding the main roads, where Hayes's allies might be watching. Now, as the territorial capital came into view, Eleanor felt a surge of cautious hope. The sealed envelope of evidence remained secure, along with Thomas's letter and Winter's documents. If she could reach Governor Potts, there was a chance for justice. "We should separate here," Michael suggested, as they approached the outskirts. "They'll be looking for a woman traveling with a man." Eleanor nodded. "Thank you for your help. I wouldn't have made it without you. Mother would never forgive me if I let Uncle Thomas's bride come to harm." He handed her a folded paper. "The governor's residence is marked here. Be careful, Miss Palmer. These railroad men have friends everywhere, even in Helena." Eleanor entered the city alone, her appearance transformed by Martha Sullivan's ingenuity. Gone was the respectable Eastern lady in fine traveling clothes. In her place rode a young widow in plain black, her face partially obscured by a veil, an effectively anonymous figure in a frontier town full of bereaved women. She located a modest hotel near the governor's residence, paid for one night, and slipped to her room without drawing attention. After refreshing herself as best she could, she prepared the evidence, arranging the documents in logical order. The sealed envelope Thomas had left would be delivered last, its contents still unknown even to her. A knock at her door startled her. She froze, hand moving to the small derringer Martha had insisted she carry. "Miss Palmer, telegram for you." Impossible. No one knew she was here, under any name. She had registered as Mrs. Sarah Williams. "Slide it under the door, please," she called. A paper appeared beneath the door. She waited until footsteps retreated before retrieving it. The message was brief. "Beware, stop, Hayes arrived. Helena morning stage. Stop, not alone. Stop, res. Rebecca Harris. How had she known where to find Eleanor? More importantly, how had Hayes traced her so quickly? There was no time to waste. Eleanor gathered the evidence and prepared to leave immediately for the governor's residence. If Hayes was already in Helena, her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Outside, the streets bustled with afternoon activity. Eleanor kept her head down, moving purposefully toward the impressive home that served as both residence and office. For Territorial Governor William Potts, a staff member met her at the door. "May I help you, ma'am?" "I need to see Governor Potts immediately. It's a matter of territorial security." Eleanor produced Thomas's sealed envelope. "This was entrusted to me by Thomas Blackwood of Whispering Pines for delivery directly to the governor." The name Blackwood produced a reaction. "The rancher who was murdered. One moment, please." Eleanor was shown to a waiting room, acutely aware that every passing minute increased the danger. Through a window, she observed a carriage arriving, followed by Sheriff Hayes and Victor Harrington descending to the street. Her heart raced. They had come to intercept her. The door opened, and a distinguished man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard entered. "I'm Governor Potts. I understand you have something for me from Thomas Blackwood." "Yes, sir. But we must hurry." Eleanor handed him the sealed envelope. "Sheriff Hayes and Victor Harrington have just arrived. They're involved in Thomas's murder and will try to stop you from seeing this evidence." Potts's eyebrows rose, but he took the envelope, breaking the seal immediately. As he scanned the contents, his expression hardened. "These are serious allegations, Miss Palmer. Eleanor Palmer. I was engaged to marry Thomas before his murder." She quickly produced the additional documents. "These provide further evidence of the conspiracy. Banking records showing bribes, surveyors' maps with calculated profits from the railroad diversion." Footsteps and voices approached in the hallway. "Governor Potts!" Hayes's voice called out. "We need to speak with you urgently." The governor made a swift decision, moving to his desk and pulling a cord. Moments later, a side door opened, revealing a uniformed man. "Captain Reynolds, please escort Miss Palmer to my private study and remain with her." To Eleanor he added, "Wait there while I handle this. You'll be safe." As Captain Reynolds led her through a connecting door, Eleanor heard the governor greet Hayes and Harrington with convincing cordiality. The next hour passed in tense silence. Eleanor heard raised voices occasionally from the governor's office, followed by periods of quiet. Captain Reynolds stood guard, his hand never far from his holstered pistol. Finally, Governor Potts entered, his face grave but satisfied. "Miss Palmer, I owe you a debt of gratitude. The evidence Thomas Blackwood collected is conclusive. Hayes and Harrington are currently being held by territorial marshals." Relief washed over Eleanor. "And Mayor Morgan?" "A telegram has been sent to federal authorities in Whispering Pines. He'll be in custody by nightfall, along with Dr. Harris and others implicated in these documents." Dr. Harris was involved? Though she had suspected, confirmation still pained her. Deeply, I'm afraid. According to Thomas's final report, Harris was their medical examiner, falsifying death certificates to cover previous murders of landowners who refused to sell to Harrington. Eleanor thought of Rebecca, who had risked everything to help her. What will happen to them? They'll stand trial for corruption, conspiracy, and murder. Potts studied her thoughtfully. "Thomas wrote about you in his final letter. Said you had exceptional analytical skills, an eye for detail. He believed you. Would be the one to deliver this evidence if anything happened to him. I never even met him," Eleanor said softly. "Yet you've proven his faith in you correct." The governor gestured to the documents. "These will ensure justice for Thomas Blackwood and Jake Winters. The railroad will come to Whispering Pines as originally planned, benefiting the entire territory, rather than lining the pockets of corrupt men." 3 weeks later, Eleanor stood before Thomas Blackwood's grave in the Whispering Pines Cemetery. The town had changed dramatically since her departure. Mayor Morgan and Dr. Harris awaited trial. In Helena, Sheriff Hayes and Victor Harrington had already been convicted of conspiracy and murder. Rebecca Harris had taken over her father's medical practice temporarily, showing surprising skill and determination to restore honor to her family name. Mrs. Sullivan approached, placing a hand gently on Eleanor's shoulder. "He would have been proud of you." "I wish I could have known him," Eleanor replied, adjusting the flowers she'd placed on the grave. "In some ways, I think you did." Mrs. Sullivan smiled sadly. "Through his letters, his home, the people who loved him. You understood what drove him: justice, integrity, building something meaningful here." Eleanor nodded, touched by the observation. "What will happen to his ranch now? That's actually why I came to find you." Mrs. Sullivan produced an official-looking document. "Thomas's will was read yesterday. He left everything to you, Eleanor." "You would inherit regardless of whether the marriage took place." Mrs. Sullivan's eyes twinkled. "My nephew was nothing if not thorough." As they walked back toward town, Eleanor gazed at the distant mountains, the sprawling landscape that would now be her home. She had come to Whispering Pines seeking marriage and found herself a widow before ever becoming a bride. Yet somehow, in seeking justice for Thomas Blackwood, she had discovered her true calling. Governor Potts had offered her a position with the Territorial Investigative Service, recognizing her unique skills. "We need minds like yours," he'd said, "especially as the territory grows." The mail-order bride had become a frontier detective. It wasn't the life Eleanor Palmer had journeyed west to find, but standing now in the golden afternoon light, she knew it was the life she was meant to live. And somewhere, she liked to think, Thomas Blackwood was smiling his approval. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.